Thank you, everybody. I'm John Terry from Leankit, and I am going to talk to you today a little bit about how we do things at Leankit. So not Leankit the product, but Leankit the company. And in particular, I want to talk about some problems that we had over the last year and sort of ways that we worked with our team to get aligned around solving those problems, and then some of the practices that we put in place as a result of improved alignment. So this started, or maybe not started, this came to a head around the third quarter of last year. And this is not going to work. It was working a second ago, and now it's not going to work. There we go. We were doing fine, but fine is not great. And especially fine wasn't great because we, as a company, had generally been doing pretty great for several years. So Leankit started in 2009 in my friend Steven's basement, became our real job in 2011, and pretty much doubled year over year, doubled or tripled year over year in terms of revenue and people for several years. And towards the tail end of last year, we were getting slightly not on that course. And that was a problem. And maybe more important as a forward-looking problem, we were in a situation where we were doing a little bit of this. This is elephant seals slamming into each other to show who's more manly, which we had some of that going on in our organization, where we had, for various reasons, our fault, not theirs, we had created a situation where some of our technology leadership were doing quite a bit of fighting with one another, and we were not productive as a result. And we brought them together in an offsite because we had to fix this. This was becoming a significant problem. We needed to do something about it. And so it started off, I think one of the things we really wanted to make sure people understood was this was not a blame-storming exercise. This was not about them being bad and I was going to yell at them or anything like that. What this was an attempt to reach a meeting in the minds about the situation we were in, the real situation that we were in, and getting their wholehearted participation in moving forward. We had to have that or we weren't going to succeed. So, started off by sort of clearing the air with things that I and my fellow executives had gotten wrong. And, this is a little bit of an okay. It's a little bit of an eye chart here, but we had, in a couple of different ways, sacrificed technical quality for a while. We'd had a theory that we were going to intersperse technical releases with feature development as we sort of worked our backlog. And the challenge we got into was that because, a couple of things. One, we were insufficiently staffed and not properly set up to do this was one of the things. And the other thing was that without a roadmap in place to allow sales and marketing to understand how much we would be investing in technology versus in things we could sell, it was very hard to ever actually make the sale when those things came up. And there was always a big deal and a big financial reason to not do those things. And so each time we were theoretically coming up to do one of these things, it always got pushed off. We were working in an onshore-offshore situation. We had been doing that since very, very early in the company. Wasn't a big deal when we were sort of a very small company, but as the center of gravity moved to the US started becoming more disciplined, you might say, or at least we were trying, and our partners in Argentina sort of kept doing things the way we had always done them, and that divergence became really a challenge for people to understand when we were serious about the rules and when we weren't. We had a situation where people were telling us about problems, they were warning us about problems, and we weren't listening in the way we should. And I think we were especially not listening in the way we should because we had not put a structure in place to make it easy to differentiate between grumbling, we all grumble, and surfacing of serious issues with a business case that needed to be considered. And we also, as part of this, we had a challenge where as any company, you just start off as just a mass of people around a table, and the mass of people get somewhat bigger, and at first there's no structure, it's just a happy, productive mob. And we tried to split this out into teams, but we did it prematurely. The teams were not big enough, they were not sufficiently staffed, they were not cross-functional, and so they really weren't effective. And so we had the illusion of teams, and from the outside in, sales and marketing and other people sort of looked at this and said, I don't understand why this team isn't delivering or this team isn't delivering. We really didn't have teams. It made it very hard to actually effectively limit WIP. We told them, none of this is your fault, this is our fault. We told them, so Leankit is a venture capital backed company. Up until that time, or relatively recently before that, it had been angel investors we had been raising money from. During 2014, we raised our first professional VC money. That process, surprise, surprise, took longer than we expected. We had started trying to put some things in place when the money wasn't there, because we thought the money was going to come very soon, and left some people kind of hanging out on limbs because those things were insufficiently funded. We were working on two major partnerships, and I just call them Company A and Company B. They are two of the very biggest software companies in the world, and neither of them worked out quite the way we thought they would. And one of the teaching moments for this, for us as an executive team, and one of the admissions, was that we had failed to limit WIP. So trying to take on two partnerships with the two of the biggest software companies in the world at the same time is not wise. It might seem like options and opportunities. Instead, what it was an inability to focus. And so, we were sort of admitting that to the organization, and we were trying to point out to the team and thinking about this, that, neither one of these worked out. Partly that was because trying to do both of them at the same time was probably a mistake. Still in all, everything you try that's big is not going to succeed. If you try hard things, you are going to fail sometimes. And so one of the things we wanted to be really clear about here was the mistake was not going out on a limb trying hard things. The mistake was the lack of strategic focus, which made it very hard to communicate within the organization and spread our resources too thin. And last, one of the things that we had to own up to was that we had failed to put sort of, in this age of holacracy, hierarchies are unpopular, but I don't buy it. I think hierarchies are actually pretty important. And one of the things we had failed to do as a leadership team, so our leadership team, Stephen and Daniel and I and Chris Heffley are the founders of Leankit. We are friends for many, many years. It was very hard it was simultaneously hard and somewhat unnecessary in our personal relationship to have a hierarchy, right? We just worked together. We all knew where the boundaries were. They were kind of vague, and it worked together. But as we got bigger as an organization, while that worked for us, it did not work for the organization. And so we created a situation where people didn't understand where direction was coming from, and consequently they made mistakes, asked the wrong people for the wrong things, got the wrong answer, or got different answers, and that really was a challenge. And also, one of the things, so this at the time has the name newbie on there. There's now a person in that spot. But again, as a group of founders who are technologists who were building a company that was, we're building the software we loved. For a long time, we didn't really do product management in a formal sense because the product was our vision flowing out onto the page, right? And so a formal process didn't seem particularly necessary. So we needed to own up to a bunch of mistakes on our part, recognize the part that those things had played in the situation so that we could move forward on the things that we needed to change together. Part of what we needed to get across to them was the fact that these were not things that just affected us as executives. So I've moved the numbers off of here, but basically what this is a revenue chart of revenue across there and years across the bottom. So like I said, we have been in a scenario and we have been invested in by venture capitalists in a scenario that in essence entails doubling of revenue on an annual basis. That's the goal. And so this green is the target line, and at this point, towards the end of 2014, we were off from the target line. We were a little bit below. And it seemed to them that we were a little bit below. And one of the things that we needed to express to them, and by the way, I don't know how many of you guys are sort of in the business side of your businesses or tightly connected to the business side of the businesses. The reason that this mattered was we needed our people to understand that this was their problem, not just the company problem, that this really mattered and was going to affect them, and they needed to be involved in solving this, you know, for this to be the kind of company that they wanted to work in. So you know, they might have looked at this and said, oh, you know, we're a little off. Not a big deal, right? So, you know, we'll make it up later, right? We're going to work really hard and solve this technical debt stuff, and, you know, we can do a release, you know, in a couple of quarters, and we'll make a lot of money, and that'll just raise things back up, and we'll get back up there. Well, it's not how it works, or it's not, at least not how it works in our business model. So we're a SaaS subscription business, i.e. people basically rebuy our product every month. They pay for our product every month. Customers that I don't get this month, not only do I not get their revenue now, I don't get their revenue for all the months in the future. So a gap like this here in a couple of years actually looks like this. And the revenue I'm giving up is not just this, it's actually all of that cumulative lost revenue for that time period. So what seems like a very small thing, we needed to really have them understand that that's a big deal. We needed them to understand that, again, we're a venture-backed company, so we are partly growing based on very fast-growing revenues, but we also need to keep raising money periodically. And if you are a little bit off, maybe that's okay, but at a certain point of being off, you might or might not be able to raise money at all. And if you can, there's a significant difference in the there's two factors in your ability to raise money. One is your revenue, and one is the multiple. Those two things multiplied together is how much money you can raise, essentially. So if your revenue rate is lower, the multiplied number is lower. And very often, if it's lower enough, then the multiple is lower because the belief from the market is that you're going to grow slower in the past. And so, you know, they can make significant differences. There's also the risk that, you know, being off a little bit doesn't seem like much, but most organizations are either in a virtuous cycle or a vicious cycle. Momentum is happening. If you are growing, you tend to do things that cause you to keep growing. If you are not growing, that tends to cause things that pull you down, and you might not just be a question of being able to raise funds or not, but actually that this starts declining, lost market share and everything, you know, your inability to grow gives an opening for your competitors to grow at your expense. And to put it very simply for people who really didn't care about money at all, if we could not get the point of money across whatsoever, if you are on revenue target, you have lots of money to build cool stuff and have a great time. If you are down here flattening out, you are stuck in a world where sales and marketing beat you up for Me Too features and you don't get to do anything fun. So what we really needed to get across to them was that while we had clearly made a lot of mistakes as an executive team, and we had tried to solve some of those problems, but this was something where we really needed them engaged to solve things going forward. So the first thing that we talked about with them was that there are things that we really believe in as an organization that if you don't believe in them, it's time to go, basically. These are not just things we talk about. It's not just marketing material. This is who we are. We are going to do things this way. You're not going to wait John out and eventually he'll walk away and you don't have to do this stuff. So some of those things, we are a lean company. So one of the things that we talked about with them and that we've been hammering home a lot more in the last year is training, retraining, and talking all the time about this is who we are as a company. It's embedded in everything we do. We're working right now on linking our sales model to Lean and Kanban because we do not want to have a sales model that's divergent from who we are and what we believe in. Kanban is absolutely what we do. It's what we sell. This has always been true, but doubling down on that and really pushing people to become expert Kanbaners in their own right, not just rely on some of us to be the experts in this space. FSGD, which if some of you might have seen last year at some talks, this is our own internal thinking tool about what it takes to effectively plan work. This is our encapsulation of the things that work must have as attributes for it to be successful. One of the key ideas, we started putting this out actually significantly earlier in the year. Than this offsite that I'm talking about, where we brought together the bull, elephant, seals. But we'd started talking about this for a while, and it had already been pretty successful in our thinking and had some big impacts and benefits. One of the things we had to work out actually with our technical leadership team was a misunderstanding and a miss of the relative weight and importance of different things. So these things are all important. All four of these letters are important in this model. But in our model of SaaS software delivered every month, getting incremental revenue, frequent is the most important thing. It's the point of the exercise. Good is extremely important. One of the challenges we had was that good was in the eye of the beholder, and we had to work out with the team, actually, in some ways coming out of this workshop with some of these guys, was we needed to stop just talking about the word quality. So in essence, we kind of made it, you can't just say quality. So what we talk about is quality in two contexts. You have marketability as an aspect of your product, and you have sustainability as an aspect of your product. So marketability is quality from the customer's perspective in terms of the things they buy, in terms of what sales and marketing asks for, in terms of what product management puts on the roadmap. Sustainability is those aspects of quality that keep your customer in the long run because they're happy with how the product works, because you can keep it cheap enough because you don't have to have too high an operating costs. You're sustainable as an organization. So breaking that idea of goodness out into those two component parts really drastically improved the communication within the organization about what we meant when we talked about things. And again, this understanding of the idea of frequency of delivery, because what we're aiming for is frequency of revenue in terms of the business model, like I already talked about. Some minimal standards in terms of technical quality. Everything we do is going to be iterative, so we had to establish, what was the minimum attributes of something that would allow it to be sustainable in the long run, even if it didn't have everything we wanted in terms of sustainability in the short run. And what we basically came to was that if things had been tested, logged, documented, and most crucially reviewed, even though there might be more sustainability to add in later, there was a shared understanding of where we were in terms of sustainability now, and there was a much better framework for continued investment in sustainability in that work item, whatever that part of the system was. One of the things that we started working on with the team in terms of, and this seems like a practice, but it's not. It's not. I don't think it is. The idea of stopping the line, the idea of stopping to fix things immediately, this is something we've been trying to teach or trying to get people to do for a long time. And actually what we discovered as a management team is this actually ended up being something where we had to show them how to stop the line a number of times to give people the confidence to do it themselves. It wasn't enough just to say it. We had to demonstrate this idea. We had to demonstrate that, that trying to work really hard behind the scenes to make something work while the sky is falling and you're trying to do everything else is not actually effective. You feel like you're doing the right thing and keeping the ball rolling, but you're not. Again, this idea that this is something everybody has to do. One of the really hard things for people was, it's like, well, what if I call a stop the line and it's not really a big deal, right? Like, well, I'm going to look stupid. And we had to get across to people, well, it's okay. We all make mistakes. And the only way we're going to get to a set of shared norms and understanding about what is important and what is not is to test those things, to actually do them. So the false alarms were perfectly fine. And then one of the things, we really had to work on with the teams is understanding that, and I'll get to our team structure in a moment, but when we looked at Stop the Lines, it wasn't just the people immediately working on that in their work. It really had to, at the very minimum, affect the cross-functional team that they're part of, because anything that the other people are doing while you're trying to solve that potentially gets in the way of the problem solver, so it must affect the entire immediate team. And if anybody else is going to be required from other teams, they needed to stop too. Because again, it's when you have a serious problem, the last thing, you need to focus on the problem, and you can't afford to have other things happening and distracting you. Not to mention getting in the way of people's understanding, like sales, marketing, other parts of the organization, that there actually is a serious issue in flight. And then one of the last things, and this is not an all-at-once thing, by the way, this is something we sort of evolved into. One of the last things was an understanding that it's not good enough to do a retrospective at some point when you've done a Stop the Line. When you do a Stop the Line, you need to do a retrospective before you go back to it, because you're not going to go back to it if you don't do it then. Take advantage of, never let an emergency go to waste. You really need to sit down and think about it then while it's fresh in your mind. And frankly, while you have the bandwidth to do it and the other things are not pressing in on you. Solving the problem in the long run is part of solving the problem. And one of the last things, so, I'm gonna beg to differ with some folks in the DevOps space. I know that DevOps is about values, and it's about the organization working together, and it's about, there's lots of things about DevOps, which are fantastic. But frankly, most of them are not new. They're new for a new audience. What's really genuinely new in this space right now is the fact that automation at extreme scale is becoming practical. And we are able to move away from giving cute little names to individual servers that we then lovingly care for when they have problems, and will do anything to get them healthy and up and running, because we just heart them. We just heart the heck out of them, and they're super awesome. And move them into a world where they are considered properly, which is a source of, cows produce meat. Dogs produce love, cows produce meat, right? So we shouldn't love our servers. They serve a purpose. So when our pets get sick, we lovingly care individually for them. You've got people who care for your cattle as well, and they keep the coyotes and the wolves and whatnot away. But if some of those animals are sick and they're going to get the rest of the herd sick, the same gun puts that cow down, and you buy more. Because the point is this, it's not love. So we really needed to get this idea across to the organization of get out of this mode of fixing immediate problems and get into the mode of creating a system where when problems arise, you can push those servers out of line, you can drop things out of the network, you can immediately spin back up exactly the same thing based on configuration that you know is right. Again, there's lots of practices that go into this, detailed practices, but the first thing is an understanding of the value here, the belief system here, that this is the only way a technology organization can do things rapidly and at scale. So We are certainly not originators of this whatsoever. This is, in essence, the Spotify model. But one of the things we moved to pretty sharply after this, and this is actually something that a fair number of our technology people did not want to do. They didn't like this idea. But we shifted from our previous, well, first the Happy Mob, and then part of what we had done as we came out of the Happy Mob had been moving into component teams. The idea of layer teams within our technology, which our technologists loved, because it meant we were going to get the most beautiful hand-rolled code that you ever saw that was done with love and care. And what we moved to instead was a matrix mode of guilds and squads. So guild being your quote-unquote reporting structure, which is about hiring, training, standards, and mentoring. This is your skills way of looking at the organization. And then, by contrast, your squads, which are quote-unquote dotted line, in some ways, delivery groups. The typical agile goal, backed up by lots of metrics, is 7 plus or minus 2 members. Our goal is that each of these squads has the skills for 80% of the work that comes across their desk without reference to other people. People can belong to only one squad with the exception of product management folks. That those people are located together. You know who your squad is because you look around the room and they're the people who are in the room with you. And that work, and this was a huge learning curve for our sales and marketing people. It drives them nuts. They can't get their heads around this. But we assign work to the squad. We don't assign work to the squad members. So there's no such thing as resource allocation. This is a pipeline of work by squads. So each one of our senior execs who reports to me has cross-cutting people in each one of our, these are the squads that we've got. One of the things that we did as an investment decision in setting up the squads as we were looking at these ideas of automation, these ideas of pets and cattle, was sort of an allocation decision that I know, again, people will say DevOps shouldn't be a thing. DevOps should be everybody's beliefs and values. It should be everybody's skill set, et cetera, et cetera. True to some degree, but when you're doing a new thing, you need a focused effort on doing that thing well. We have lots of technical debt that we needed to deal with. So we created a squad that we call ADAT, which is architecture, tooling, and automation, basically our DevOps squad, because we really, what we wanted to do was take the allocation decision out of what I needed to do as one of the most senior executives, was remove some of our investment decision making from the roadmap conversation. There's certain things that we need to choose or not choose to do in a time period, but some of this investment we just needed to say, you know what, basically, 1/7 of our investment at all times in terms of technology personnel is going to be going towards technical debt reduction. That's happening all the time. These are a bit of an eye chart, but again, basically we have 2 org charts. One is the guilds, and one is the squads. One of the other things, and actually it's something that's potentially interesting, although it's obviously an eye chart. The squads don't have a leader. So there's a lead for the developer, there's a product manager, there's a UX person, there's a tester, there's an ops person. There is no manager for the squad. So guilds have managers, there's a reporting structure. But basically our intent is that while the other developers might report to the lead developer, the tester does not, nor does the ops person, nor does the product manager, nor does the UX person. They are that person's equal. They are equal functions in the conversation about what the squad is doing. One of the things that we did, which I think has been crucial to the success as we've been doing this, is squad rooms. So there's the eternal debate about open offices versus private offices. And open offices are supposed to be great for collaboration. Everybody's in a big room and we can all just wander around and talk. Private offices are fantastic for individual productivity. We believe that at least if you've created a team structure of a cross-functional team that truly work together all the time, that the right answer here is a room for the team. So collaboration is right. Overhearing conversations, hearing what's going on, having situational awareness, all of that is genuinely, truly valuable. It's not wrong when people say that. except that the things you need to overhear and collaborate in are your team things, not the other stuff. Overhearing from your team is useful. Overhearing from some random person who has nothing to do with you is just annoying and gets in your way. And yes, well, individual productivity is higher in private offices. Individual productivity is not the point. Productivity of individual developers is irrelevant. What matters is flow through the team. And so putting the team in a situation where they can maximize their team productivity is the essence of things. And the other thing that it does is creates a scenario where you get a genuine team by putting people together and giving them the opportunity to close the door and tell the rest of the world to, shove it. So this is a poster that one of our dev teams who called themselves Groot, there's also another team called Rocket, this is something that they chose to create themselves, and we're starting to see this as you get genuine team formation because the team is really self-contained. They are an island unto themselves in certain ways, and in ways that we never saw before, this setting up. Some other structures in terms of the way we run the organization we've got two sort of middle management layers that we use. One is called the Tribal Council, which is chaired by the PD execs, product development execs, and includes product managers, UX leads, and the technical managers, sort of wearing their hats as delivery leads, people who get stuff done on the roadmap. We discuss the roadmap, we discuss departmental policies, and basically the way we do this is a stand-up on Monday and Wednesday, and then a full meeting on Thursday. So we sort of surface issues and then solve them at the end of the week. An important part about the way we do this, I think, is that, Florent is responsible for product management. Daniel is responsible for product development, the developers, and Stephen is responsible for our operations and infrastructure. We don't have them meet with their subordinates separately. Instead, I meet with them as a group, and then they meet with the people who report to them as a group. And what that allows us to do is have these conversations be cross-functional. So just as the teams are cross-functional, our governing group for the department is also a cross-functional group. It also allows, in essence, if all three of Daniel, Stephen, and Florent are there, great. If two of them are gone, no big deal, the meeting keeps on going. So it's not sort of an individual team meeting, it has a life of its own, it runs itself, and frankly, even if all three of those guys were gone, the meeting would keep going on. This is a conversation for cross-cutting issues between the squads. The other thing we have is a subsection of those same people, the technical managers, but wearing their hats as architects. So sort of two different, some of the same people, but two different contexts. In this case, Florent is not in that meeting, I'm not in that meeting. Stephen and Daniel, as chief technologists, are leading a meeting of our chief technologists where they are discussing technical standards, they are discussing the roadmap for that ADAT squad that I talked about. Again, this is not a decision for product management, this is a decision for our technology leadership to decide where we want the next technology investment for the department to be. And then also, I talked about that idea before about the difference between whining and a proposal for investment. This is the scenario we created where we basically said, okay, we have given you technology a certain amount of bandwidth to do with as you will. This is your thing to invest. But then the other thing we said was, we know that there will be times where we need more than that. This is your venue in which you, in essence, are going to put together an investment proposal as a group and put this forward for consideration on the roadmap. This is a once-a-week working session, and they report back to the Tribal Council. So think of it as, in essence, as a subcommittee. Product roadmap. So up until this time, we had not had a real product roadmap. So I had done quarterly roadmap webinars publicly, but really that was, I don't know, more about communication and less about internal decision making. So one of the things we did was, for the first time, we really created a roadmap, and we created a roadmap that from a Kanban or Agile perspective was probably, people would say, stupidly long and forecasting out way too far, but we did it very intentionally. So we basically set a 9-month roadmap. We had had a real challenge with communication with sales and marketing, with confidence, with decision making, and so what we needed to do, and chasing strategies when shiny things came across our path and all kinds of things, what we needed to do was, in essence, nail our flag to the mast, if you know the metaphor. This is sort of, we were creating a situation where we were not allowing ourselves as an executive team to change our mind. We were putting this out very intentionally, knowing later we didn't want to forecast that far out, but knowing that in the short term we needed to create stability and confidence. So the goal going forward, and what we've gotten into now, is a mode where and I'll talk a little bit more about our cadences, but basically we're on a 6-week cadence. Talk more about that in detail. What we're looking for now is a model that for each one of our squads, product management is working in rollout and measurement of whatever was released in the previous sweep. We're executing on our pull plan for this sweep. We have A3s and mock-ups for the next sweep, the next 6 weeks. At 2 sweeps out, we have just A3s, just a concept document, and then after that we have a theme but no details. And again, I'll talk a little bit more about what I mean for each one of those things. We started very explicitly implementing Don Reinertson's ideas around cost of delay, built an analytical model for our product management team to use around the work that we're deciding, which has been a powerful tool, sometimes in bursting people's bubbles about things that they thought would be super valuable and awesome. Putting numbers to it has been really important. So the A3s. A3s are a document that we use to describe the work that's going to happen during a sweep, during a 6-week period. Not a contract, not a requirement specification, a problem statement. So they are a description of the problem that we're trying to solve. They are done intentionally in pencil. They are handwritten on an A3 sheet of paper. The goal being that while you can copy and paste a lot of garbage that's really irrelevant, pretty hard to do that when you're handwriting the stuff. You actually have to think, engage your brain when you're handwriting. There's also kind of a limit, unless you're one of those Middle Ages monks who could write really, really small. Most people can only write so small, which means you have an automatic scope limitation by doing things here. A really important thing, and this is an example of what we have on our A3 documents, it really is intended to be a problem statement, not a specification, in no way technical requirements. Sometimes what we end up as the result has nothing to do with our original hypothesis, but what we're trying to do is empower the teams to understand what problem we're trying to solve during that 6 weeks. So the 6 weeks. We have a really cheesy acronym. We call a 6-week period a sweep, 6-week execution and evaluation period. This is a regular cadence where we do 1 week of alignment planning each 6 weeks, and then we have 5 weeks of execution. This is not a time box in a delivery sense. We're doing continuous delivery, but it's a time box in the sense of alignment. This is when we get together and make sure that we're on the same path in terms of strategies, goals, results, etc. We have 8 of these sweeps per year with 8 pull plannings, the pull planning being our planning week, which are aligned to calendar quarters with a long sweep at the end of the year, because unfortunately the ancient Jews and Babylonians and Romans gave us calendars that don't line up perfectly, and that makes things hard. Basically what we said was a cadence that doesn't line up with the real cadence of the actual calendar is going to be very hard to follow. Weeks are weeks, and that's really the cadence that employees need to follow, but managers follow cadences of quarters and years. We need to recognize that. And so basically what we have each quarter is we have a beginning of the quarters of 6 weeks, and then mid-quarter, and then quarter. It's not perfect, but it's pretty darn close. And what that's allowed us to do is synchronize that to our board meeting schedule, which has allowed our pull planning and everything else to be very synchronized with the way the entire organization works. Maybe it doesn't work for everybody, but for us, it's not enough just to say that you're on a 2-week cadence or a 4-week cadence. Having a cadence that actually lines up with the real world is pretty important in terms of your ability to communicate. So going back and looking at things like this roadmap. So if you now think about each one of those being 6 weeks, that's a quarter, that's a quarter. They pretty much line up with a calendar quarter, which makes it a lot easier for sales and marketing and our board and everybody else to look at these things and generally understand when problems will be solved in alignment with when money is supposed to come in. One of the things that we started doing in terms of our cadences was really trying to focus hard on an allocation of work. So we had a goal that about 60% of our work was going to be roadmap work. We knew that 20% of work is, unless you have a bad product, is always going to be stuff you can't predict, stuff that just falls out of the sky, defects, operational requests, etc. And we wanted to allow the other time, roughly 20%, to be able to be made as decisions by the people who are close to the work. The challenge in doing this as sort of percent allocations was that it was very, very hard for people to balance percent allocations sort of mentally as they were going along, and we are not doing frickin' timesheets. So that was out as a way to do this. Pardon my French. So what we decided to do was build this into our cadence as well. So remember I said we have a week of alignment planning, training, and coordination at the beginning of each sweep. The immediate week after that, what we now have filled with is either squad-driven work or a hackathon every sweep. And then 4 weeks of A3 investment, which is roadmap work, and then a recognition that bad things can fall out of the sky at any time and there's no way we can schedule that stuff. So what this is doing is front-loading this work by the squads so that we can ensure that it actually happens, but also time-boxing it to ensure that it stops at a certain point and we do move on to the things that need to happen on the roadmap. We now have a very specific schedule for the way we do poll planning. So there's no squad names here, but we have a calendar that we follow every poll planning week. Every poll planning week begins with leadership training for a group of people. Second day in the week, we do the last demo day of the sweep. After that is the kickoff for the next sweep by our tribal council, planning time for the squads, and then each squad comes in successively and does a presentation to the leadership on their plan. Conversation with the leadership. Won't take you through this entire thing, but we have a template that we use with every squad where we're working through and saying we basically want to make, it's myself and my 3 directs having a conversation with the squad. So again, not with the leader, the entire team. We have a conversation with the entire team to, in essence, ask them to present back to us their plan for these various things. Part of that's the roadmap work. Part of that, like I referred to, is the squad-driven work. So what we were really trying to recognize here was that not all ideas are big ideas that come from the roadmap or the leadership. There are great ideas at the team level. They can't be at the individual level. They have to have squad consensus. They don't require a lot of decision making or planning, but you know, they can be whatever the team needs them to be within a time box. You get a week. And one of the things we really try to push is, in essence, what that really means is you have 3 days of development, because your 4th day you really got to be testing and deploying, and your 5th day you got to be finalizing things. Won't take you through in detail through the rest of the road or the rest of the calendar, but the bottom line is what we're trying to do is make it so that every week, every sweep, the calendar looks exactly the same. Every squad is having a meeting at the same time. Company training happens at the same time. Roadmap planning happens at the same time. So a lot of the variability is taken out of the calendar, which leaves most of the time free for getting work done rather than fighting people's schedules and not having the right people available. We've come up with some slightly different names for typical ideas. So you've got the idea of an epic, a feature, and then a story. We have renamed those things for what we think is important for the way we work. So an epic sounds like something made up for people playing. What we want to talk about is a theme. A theme is a description of something that's aligned with a company strategy. I've already talked about A3s. A div. So we talked about stories. We also talked about potentially shippable increments. And what we shifted to is talking about divs. So a div is deployed iterative value. So what we're trying to get across the point is, what are the characteristics of this work? It's not a story. It's not potentially shippable. It is shipped. It is valuable. It is deployed. When we do demos to the rest of the organization, each team doesn't have their demo time. We have a demo time for the entire company. It's a shared venue. Each team comes up. Each team gets 5 minutes, which we use an hourglass to measure, in which they're supposed to present what they have finished, so what, why do we care, and what needs to happen now. So we're trying to talk about not just what's the technology, but what's the meaning, what's the value, and what's the handoff to other parts of the organization. And when we present that, each squad has to show, is it just in dev? Is it at least in our dog food and integration environment, or is this actually in production? We don't have hard rules about things, but we're trying to create as something of a social pressure situation where they want things to be green, and that's okay. We are now measuring deployments. Vanity metrics. So our teams measure cycle time internal to the team for process improvement. We did not want to measure cycle time across teams. It's not relevant. Every team has different cycle times based on their work. It's not useful for us to measure that as an organization. It's not actually something we can use to predict. They can use it for process improvement. We can't really use it for prediction. What we wanted to do was create a measure that would drive behavior, and the behavior that we most want as an organization right now is removing the friction of deployment. Because we want to be able to deploy more quickly, because if we can move more quickly, we can change our minds, we have higher quality, et cetera, et cetera. And so what we're measuring, we're getting information from each squad, and we talk about it individually with the squad, but as a department, what we do is an aggregate roll-up of the number of deployments to production that happen each week, and then therefore as an aggregate within the sweep. And the goal being to push that up and up and up. And there's no particular rules about this. We're just trying to create conversations about what is it that's blocking people from deploying. And last, wrapping things up slightly late, but pretty close, I hope. One of the most recent things that we've implemented, so I talked about squad-driven work. We're now doing hackathons as a regular part of our work. Obviously, we didn't invent hackathons. But putting in the cadence we think is pretty important. So this is the first week of every fourth sweep. You don't have to be present to win. The teams organize themselves, and whereas squad-driven work needs to be tangible stuff that can actually be finished. So it's not just free time, it's stuff for what the squads think they need to get done and can get done. Hackathons don't have to be that at all. So there's a standard layout for hackathon week as well. We give out intentionally stupid prizes that have no financial value whatsoever, but people treasure like crazy. And we give out the prizes in 3 categories. So we want to balance that some people do want to deliver real things. But we also recognize that other people in the organization don't necessarily, and that's okay, and we don't want them to face pressure to only do things that are going to produce tangible things. So we have a category of work that we award for things that are tangible, can get done. It's actual stuff that might have been on the roadmap but wasn't. Okay, that's cool, I've got a transition in there. We've got another category for things that don't have to have any tangible output. Pure experimentation, pure research, pure whatever the hell you want to think about for a week by yourself or with a team. Because we trust that this isn't going to be stupid stuff. People are going to experiment with interesting things. They need to be okay to fail, or sometimes they need to be, failing isn't necessarily failing. Sometimes failing is exploring an idea that could later on have been on the roadmap, but by giving people time, we discover that it really doesn't need to be. We took the time to disqualify something that everybody thought was super, super awesome. Our favorite way of describing this is a new JavaScript reference called Quasimodo 4.0, which everybody thinks is awesome. And then one that we just give to whoever we feel like based on whatever's going to be, whatever's going to be good. So what has this done for us? We set out that roadmap, which was crazy, stupid. There was no way we were going to hit it. We did. So for 8 months, we've delivered all of the things that were going to be on the roadmap with speed that is continuing to increase. We have higher product quality with less rework, which we are explicitly measuring as an organization. We actually have a new feature we're building into Leankit. We built it for ourselves for measuring rework. Significantly better morale both in the product team and on the revenue side. The sweep cycle is now really becoming automatic, where it's not something people think about. It's just a framework for how things happen, and it's made Kaizen much, much more effective. The way we've done this within our product organization is now the revenue organization, sales, marketing, et cetera, are now looking at this and saying, not only does this work, but we might want to copy some of this stuff. Which is making the organization work even more effectively together. And it's given the executives a lot more time for strategy and looking out forward instead of having to do a lot of micromanaging and peacemaking between people. So I talked about this idea of creating these teams and management structures where they're kind of self-managing at each level. By doing that, I can be at one of these meetings and hear and learn and gain information, but if I'm not, it still happens. No big deal. And that happens at my subordinates level and so on, which frees us up for a lot of other things. And in aggregate, I think what it's really gotten us from, really, is a scenario where we really were the bull elephant seals at the beginning, and instead you genuinely have an organization that's pulling together and generating good results by now. So I don't want to put this out there as a one-size-fits-all model. I'm not going to start selling the Leankit model or anything like that. Other people might do that. Your results might vary. But what I would suggest to you is, some of these things is, as you look at the way you run your organization, don't look at it as a series of good but disconnected practices. Those things are only going to work if you create a coherent model that all sticks together and people can understand and know why things are happening and thoughtfully and successfully contribute their own parts of it because they have kind of a bounded context to the parts that they actually can plug into. So with that, thank you very much. I guess if you've got any questions, I'm happy to answer them.
Sure. You mentioned about the false alarm.
Yes.
Did you have many?
A few, yeah. Yeah, we have. And we've also had some sort of fumbling on what does stop the line really mean and who needs to be involved and those kinds of things. So yes, we absolutely have. Yeah, it's working. People are actually doing it. So, I would say it went from, they pretty much always had to, like people would do it and then they would look over at me to see if it was okay to do it. And now they just do it and it's working. So. Anybody else? All right. Thank you very much for your time.